Your part of the world has already seen some extra measures as local lockdown restrictions were brought in. Now we're looking at more extensive lockdown measures and advice going nationwide. Do you support the government on this?
On balance, I do. What I would say is I think the local restrictions have had limited effectiveness. And I think it's because there's different rules in different places, Julia, so the people struggle to understand them. So in Greater Manchester, we have 4 different sets of rules because of the way this thing has changed over the summer. So I think moving back to a national message, simpler, clearer national message, I think is the right thing to do. The government is also trying to balance the kind of effect on the economy, isn't it? So it's going for a curfew, it would seem, rather than a full lockdown. What I would say to them, and this is the kind of main point I would want to stress, there will be millions of people who've woken up today worried about their jobs, who work in hospitality. And the Prime Minister needs to say something about that. There needs to be a form of furlough or some form of support for the people whose jobs will be threatened by a 10 p.m. curfew. And I would say, actually, this end of furlough in October now needs to be reviewed because there are some sectors that are just not coming back anytime soon, such as airports and aviation. So I think this has got to be a tipping point moment, Julia. There's going to have to be a review of a wider range of government policies here. But I can understand what they're trying to do. And yes, on balance, I think they're doing the right thing.
Are you at all concerned, though, that what Sir Patrick Vallance said and what Chris Whitty said, I mean, and again, you know, they were going out there as to lay the groundwork ready for Boris Johnson's announcement today. Frankly, you know, to tell us, oh, it's really, really bad. This is why you need to accept these measures. But this is all predicated on what Sir Patrick Vallance said was not a prediction. He said those words twice, not a prediction. He said it was an example scenario. It's all over the headlines. We're using it in the headlines here at talkRADIO. 49,000 cases in this example scenario by mid-October, and that's a day, and it would translate into 200 deaths a day by mid-November. Except if we are following France and Spain, we would hit nothing like that. We would hit something like a fifth of that, 10,000 cases by mid-October a day, and 30, 35, 40 maximum deaths a day. So really nothing that we possibly call a pandemic in those scenarios. And all of these measures are being based on a very, very, very fear-mongering, scaremongering scenario that, given what's happened in countries on whose trajectory we are directly following, France and Spain, will not happen. Should we be making these sort of measures that have a huge impact on people's lives, their jobs, our economy, when actually the facts don't back them up?
Well, I think it's hard to say that the chief medical officer and the chief scientific officer was scaremongering because they aren't acting politically, they are acting independently, and they are laying out a scenario that could well happen if we carry on as we are.
No, that's exactly my point. Now, look, you're not a scientist and I'm not a scientist, so it's much easier for us to say, well, we don't really understand this stuff, so let's let the experts tell us. Other experts are pointing out that their figures, they said we're on the same trajectory as France and Spain, and they've said that we're doubling every 7 days. The Office for National Statistics says we're doubling every 10 days. A massive difference there. But the French and Spanish trajectories don't lead to anything like what they were talking about yesterday. These example scenarios are so off the scale of unlikely that we are basing a government policy that is going to trash our economy, lose tens and tens and tens of thousands of jobs for no good reason.
I understand the point you're making, Julia, but I think in a moment like this, it is right to err on the side of caution. And giving people the middle prediction isn't necessarily the right thing to do because you have to confront people with what could happen in the scenario that we
could be hit by an asteroid tomorrow and all be dead. But you don't run your economy and your life on that basis.
I remember, though, coming on your programme much earlier in this, where we were saying, oh, maybe we'll end up as bad as Italy, and actually we often ended up worse than a lot of those European countries. So I'm not sure that you don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. The issue is something is changing out there. The cases are increasing rapidly. So are the admissions to hospital. And in those circumstances, any government has to act. And I think they are right to act. But what they're trying to do is strike a balance here. Not full lockdown, but obviously keep parts of the economy open. So it's a difficult one, Julia, but I think at this moment in time, the the people who are saying, "Oh, it's all a bit of a hoax. It's all about control." I just think those voices shouldn't be given much oxygen right now.
I listen, and this is where we get into this silly debate. Is that people who are questioning this are not people who are just saying, look, the tinfoil hat brigade. I've got no time for it. It's not a hoax. It's not shadowy billionaires who are trying to control us. No one thinks that. I've been fully supportive. Like you, I've taken a very sort of critical friend approach to this, and I think where the government, where we had not very little information early on, I was fully supportive of what they were doing to these measures. We now know a lot more. We've got lots of capacity. When people like Professor Carl Hennigan, Professor Carol Sikora, Professor Sunitra Gupta, when people like that, they're not tinfoil hat brigade. They are experts in their field. When they say we need to fundamentally reconsider the government response and we need to weigh up the balance of risks, which is that far more people will die of flu on these scenarios, likely scenarios, than will die of coronavirus, that we should not be shutting down our economy and cutting jobs, cutting chances of people to get cancer treatment, etc., when actually the risk is far lower than it's being made out to be by these sort of statements from Sir Patrick Vallance. Do you not think we need to have a more considered balance of risks when we decide on policy?
Well, I understand the point you're making. I'm not saying that you're playing to that brigade, but the questioning of what the government is doing does play to that, and it emboldens some of those people on the more kind of, let's say, extremes of this debate. And you quote scientists, but there are scientists with a range of opinions, and the chief medical officer, chief scientific officer have to balance all of that opinion and come up with their view, and they've given us their view. And actually, Julia, I would say the government were doing what you were advocating right through the summer. Get back to the pub, eat out to help out. They were doing what you were saying. And I think in retrospect, some of that looks a little rash now. So I think, it's a difficult one, isn't it? And I think the way we'll get through this is keeping to a sense of national unity. We're in the position that we're in. The advice is the advice that we're being given. It would be easy for me to come on your programme this morning and say, oh, yeah, the government's getting it all wrong. But you know what? I think that would be irresponsible for me to say that in the position that we're in. I don't agree with everything that they're doing by any means. But at the same time, as somebody who represents 2.8 million people, I don't think it is responsible for me to give a conflicting message to them when the government clearly are trying to warn people about what lies ahead.
How is it possible that Germany, France, they have managed to get 80% of people back into their workplaces, not just back into work? Some of the other countries, like Switzerland's Czech Republic and others, they are living, to all intents and purposes, completely normal lives now, and yet we're going back into lockdown. Does that not suggest that something is going wrong?
Shall I give you a reason, actually,
Please
about
do.
Germany? Because I was speaking to a German regional minister last week, and I was discussing this very point. And I think one of the reasons is Germany has a functional test, track and trace system, an isolate system. And we still don't have that. And voices like mine and others have been saying all year that this needs to be fixed before we get back to the autumn and the return to school. And it hasn't been fixed. So that's the reason why some other countries are controlling the virus better than we are. And in the position that we are in, when the first line of our defence, test, trace, isolate, is not working properly, obviously restrictions of this kind become necessary.
OK, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Andy Burnham, he's a former Labour Health Secretary, he's also Mayor of Greater Manchester. Really appreciate you joining us as always.